No, see, I felt complete before I was a father. I feel fulfilled in a way that nothing else could have fulfilled me in that very specific way. But since I didn't know that way even existed until I became a dad, it was never something that was planned for.
Pops in a pod. Pops in a pod.
Welcome to Pops in a Pod. I'm Peter Pop.
And I'm Nadir Pop.
Nadir, it's finally here. I can't believe we've been planning this for a while, but Father's Month, we're releasing our first episode today.
Yes, and this year I think a lot of planning has gone, considering the fact that we've got such an interesting lineup of guests, and we've been talking to them for a couple of months at least before they gave us their dates and agreed to come on the podcast. And hopefully they had fun. In fact, this one, the first one that we're starting off with, is quite an interesting personality.
Yeah, I have to give a huge shout out to a friend of mine, Anuj Guvara, and he is someone who's not a father, but still follows Pops in a Pod a bit. And he introduced me to our guest, who is Cary Edwards. Nadir, why don't you tell us a bit about Cary? Because there's so much actually we can talk about Cary.
Cary Edwards, as I said earlier, is a big personality and he wears many, many hats. He started off as a model, followed by a very, very interesting direction in VJing, and he VJ'd for Channel V and SS Music. Then, after many years, he gave that up and he became a martial arts trainer. He's also a voiceover artist. And eventually, after I think a couple of decades, he landed his first corporate gig. That's how he says it. Although his latest role will be by far the most challenging and the most interesting. He is a father to twins. But Peter, we are just not here to talk about his parenting journey, right?
Yeah, that's true, Nadir. I mean, in 120 odd episodes of Pops in a Pod, we've actually got a parent who's not married. And if you're confused about it, well, don't worry. We even talked to Cary about that. So I think, Nadir, that's enough for an introduction. Let's dive straight into our episode with Cary.
Cary has so much to tell us.
We're joined by Cary Edwards. So welcome to Pops in a
Thank you.
Pod,
Thank you so
Cary.
much for having me.
What's up, Cary?
Hey, Nader, how's it going?
But you know what? Listen, I have to be honest. And when we were like reading up on you and doing research and stuff like that,
Mhm.
right, Cary? We tried to do justice with an introduction. And I don't even think we wouldn't have even scratched the surface. So why don't you give us like a brief introduction
Okay,
about
so
you?
someone actually used this phrase, and I really like it. So Saitya and I have actually started using it. It's that we are multi hyphenates, which is that rather than saying jack of all trades, a multi hyphenate is. So yeah, I started out as a model and then became an MC and then VJ for two different channels. I started off with Channel V and then I moved to the south and. So I was with a channel called SS Music in the South, and stand-up comedy, and I taught mixed martial arts for a while. And now I'm the head of marketing for a global company. So yeah, there's just it's kind of all over the place because I think I get bored easily, and so when something stops being fun, I just stop doing it.
And I think it's just getting started.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I think since becoming a father, my feeling is that this is not going to get boring anytime soon. I made this joke with Saitya the other day. I said, look, I'm in this like wholeheartedly for at least the next 20 years. Yeah, like after that I can't guarantee anything, but like for at least the next 20 years, I'm in. And she just gave me this incredibly dirty look. She's like, right, 20 years. I'm like, I'm just saying. I don't want to like exceed. Like I'm hoping to exceed expectations, but I want to set the expectations reasonable.
Hopefully, by then the kids would have left home and gone and done something for themselves.
You know, It's a really weird thing, but so like in the West, right? Like you turn 18, you leave home. That's it's a thing, right? India, we don't do that, you know. And I mean, my kids aren't even a year old yet, and already I'm dreading the day that they're like, okay, Dad, Mom, we're out of here. And I'm like, no. Okay, wait, that's a long time away. I don't like. Let me not stress about it right now. So yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it is
But
something.
but hang on. So just for context, because we're an audio
Hmm.
podcast and a lot of people can't see you, so if you, like most of us, spent like the late 90s and early 2000s watching Channel V, then you probably saw Carrie in there.
Just without the
Uh,
beard
but
that I now sport.
yeah.
So yeah.
But one of the things that I like how you've kind of used that, right? Hyphenates. One of the latest hyphenates, and to be specific, about 11 months ago, you added was parent.
Yes.
So here's a question which probably you've been asked by all your friends and everyone else. Did you always want to be a parent? I want to start off by that.
So, to give you the answer that I gave Sahitya when we first had that conversation, we started talking about children, and she kind of misunderstood me when I said I'm good either way, right? And she thought what I meant was I don't care, and what I was really trying to tell her was um, whether or not I have children, it wasn't something like it wasn't a goal that was like my life will be complete if I have children. I'm like my life will be complete whether or not I have children. So in that sense, I mean, I don't care either which way. Um, but I mean, I've always said things like, uh, well, if I ever have children, I'd want to raise them in Bangalore, for example, right? Because I grew up in Bangalore. Of course, the very fact that I raised my children in Chennai says volumes about Bangalore. So, you know, but
Oh
but
boy.
that's kind of what it was that, I didn't have a horse in that race. I was like, hey, if I never have children, I'll still live a very happy, fulfilled life. And if I have children, well, then great, bonus fulfillment. But it wasn't like to fill a basic requirement, So like a lot of women will say things like, I only truly felt complete when I became a mother. And I'm like, no, see, I felt complete before I was a father. Um, I feel fulfilled in a way that nothing else could have fulfilled me in that very specific way. But since I didn't know that way even existed until I became a dad, it was never something that was planned for. Although, just to be clear, we spent 3 years planning our children. Yeah, just
I'm glad
yeah,
you
yeah. Because I
clarified.
just realized as I said it, I was like, when people say plan and kids, and yeah, yeah. Chennai was in a bit of a tizzy because we had uh, we had like a whole group of people who were 100% certain that we had IVF because because I'm going to be 44. And then there was a whole group of people who were absolutely certain that it was an accidental pregnancy because, well, I mean, obviously, because we're an unmarried couple, so it must have been an accident. And I also like to say, well, I mean, you're not entirely wrong. I mean, one was planned and the other one was kind of, you know,
Tagged along.
yeah, I'm like, I mean, we didn't plan for twins. You can't really do that. It's a less than 1% chance to naturally have twins. So, I mean, who even thinks, that you're gonna have twins, and then bang, you're having twins, and it's like, okay, okay, yeah, fair enough. So I was very excited, and Sahitya was a bit freaked out.
A lot of people, after the obvious IVF questions and all of that, they immediately gravitate towards, oh, so then there must be twins in either one of your family sides, and you should trace them and go back. And I'm like, I don't really care. Did you get those kind of questions?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
which one
yeah,
of
yeah.
your family members
We
had twins
we,
earlier?
we we still do, and it's just like, so twins. Whose side of the family do twins run in? And I'm like, oh, their parents' side. And then they get very confused, and then they're like, whose parents? I'm like, their parents. And they're like, wait, but you guys are their parents. I'm like, yeah, twins run on the parent side of the family. It's like, I don't know if you know this, but like I have twins. It's insane. And it's like
That's
I
so
stop with the one generation, and like I know what people are trying to do, and I just like sometimes I just Sahitya says that I have a what was the phrase that she used? Uh, she said, "You're sick," and I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because you have this weird, like you get this perverse satisfaction in being obtuse," and I'm like, "Because it's fun sometimes."
So I think this is the point in the episode where I say that my mom was a twin. So you can
Hey,
imagine the speculation when my wife was pregnant.
oh yeah,
Like till we actually went and did the scan, it's like, will it be twins? Will you also have twins? So I know exactly what you're talking about.
in you just mentioned right now that you're unmarried, ooh, and
hmm
you just got twins. They're about to turn a year old now very soon, right? But then
yep.
when you suddenly look at it from an outsider's perspective, right? In India, we're still used to the idea of live-in relationship. Having children while being in a live-in relationship has obviously challenges on many fronts, right? From your family to your formal entities, and we honestly cannot even imagine like how you guys navigated that or continue to navigate it. Why don't you just walk us through some of the experiences that you've had in this very interesting situation that you're in?
It's yeah, no, it is pretty bizarre. And one of our friends, right around the time that we got pregnant, because we were telling our friends, we're like, we're seriously considering children. I mean, this is something that we've been talking about for a really long time. And most of our friends were like, yeah, why don't you just get married before you do it? And it just makes everything so easy, right? Like everything's, I mean, that's kind of what the system is designed to do. And I was like, getting married, if that's something that a person wants, then by all means I think that they should absolutely so a lot of people think that I'm anti-marriage, right? And I'm like, I am not in any way anti-marriage. I'm only anti-marriage for me. Like everyone else can do it, right? But if you're going to get married, the reason that you're going to get married shouldn't be, well, it'll make life easier, right? And, I mean, we've had people say things like, look, I mean, if for no other reason, just the tax benefits alone are great. And we're like, I'm not getting mad. Like, I'm not going to take a principled stand on something, and then the second my life gets difficult, I'm going to be like, oh, I have principles, and if you don't like them, I have other principles. Like that's not like I'm not. That's just not kind of how we function. But it's been like from the strangest places. So, for example, insurance doesn't cover when you go in to have your child. The hospital does. I mean, the insurance doesn't cover anything because you're not married. And I'm just like, but those are two entirely separate things, right? So if someone's doing a medical procedure, their marital status shouldn't be a part of that process, right? Like, oh, you're not married, we don't cover you. You're married, we cover you. And it's like, okay, if
Wow, that's
that's
the first time hearing of
yeah.
it,
and
honestly.
so and so when we spoke with our insurers, we said, well, if that's the case, then you shouldn't be charging us the same premium,
Yeah.
right? If you're saying that there's some stuff that you're not going to cover, that you cover for every other woman on the planet, but you just won't cover it for us because we're not married, then you shouldn't be charging us the same premium, right? And it was a long drawn out fight, but eventually they were like, okay, fine, yeah, we don't want the bad publicity, so we'll just we'll go ahead and we'll cover your the cost of. I mean, it's not even like they cover that much, yeah, because it's like
Yeah.
it's like 50 grand, okay, which I'm sure back in 1987 was like an amazing amount of money, right? And it probably covered hospital, and then like 6 weeks of recovery after. Yeah, but like right now, if especially for us, because we had Sahitya had to have an emergency C-section, so 50 grand is not covering anything. But like it was the principle of the thing more than anything else. It was like, no, if we pay
Yeah.
a premium, you cover us just like you would for any other woman, right? So it's not like We didn't want special treatment. We just wanted her to be treated like every other pregnant woman would be treated. And I think that that's a fairly reasonable ask. And there was a lot of back and forth, but then we got it done. But then there's other like really weird things, right? And I don't know if this is a problem because it's in English or what, but so in Tamil Nadu, you have to register your pregnancy, right? And you get something called a pick me number. So when we went in to register the pregnancy, the form said mother's name, husband's name, and I'm like, I'm pretty certain that those are not the nouns that work together, right? Those are not the conjoined nouns, right? Because I'm quite sure that it's mother and father, husband and wife, right? So what the hell is mother husband, right? Like, and so the person was like, well, I mean, but whoever the father is also the husband. I'm like, not necessarily, darling, not
Yeah.
necessarily. And she was like, well, but I mean, like, you guys are going to get married. And we're like, no. She's like, what do you mean, no? We're like, we're never getting married. And she's like, then how are you having a child? I was like, so we had the sexy time, and she got the pregnant, and the baby is going to come out, and that's how we had the baby. And she's like, I know how you have a baby, but like, how are you guys having a baby? And I'm like, exactly like it is for everyone else, right? Like the process is exactly the same. And she was just like, she couldn't get it in her head, like how is this happening? And so we were like, hey, can we just talk to your boss? And so we did. And then we went through this entire conversation again, like almost word for word, right? And that guy didn't get it. So we're like, can we talk to your boss? And then we went, to the next level and the next level and the next level and the next level, to the point that, I could literally just have that conversation in my sleep, because it's like all the questions were exactly the same, in exactly the same order, with exactly the same amount of disbelief, and all of that. And so finally, we said, okay, since you guys have absolutely no solution for this, we're going to put my name under husband's name, but we're also going to give you a letter saying that we are not trying to like commit fraud with the government, and the only reason that we're putting my name under husband, in spite of the fact that we're not actually married, is because you don't have another option. And so that's ultimately what we ended up doing. And but we would get like really weird questions. Like someone asked us, well, but if you guys are not married, what are you going to put under father's name on the birth certificate? We're like, my name. And they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, but how will they know? And I'm like, they don't decide. Like, what do you think, that you go to some office and they're like, Acha, you will be the father? No, I don't care that you have not met this woman. You are going to be the father. Like, that's not how it works. We tell them what we want and they put it in the. And so a lot of people just had these incredibly, you know, delusional questions. And it's like,
Yeah.
even in a topsy-turvy world, it couldn't work like that.
You carry. I have I have one question since you brought up your parents as well in
Mhm.
multiple contexts. How did they react when they eventually found out that you're going to be a dad and you're going to I don't even know if I should take this term, but co-parent, right? Considering
So it's it's actually a really cute story, right? So we so this was like, lockdown, like Corona had happened, and Saitya and I, like, the plan was that 2020 was the year that we were going to start trying, right? And so Corona hit, and so August 2020 was supposedly when we were going to start trying. And I said, listen, I think we're going to have to put this off for a year. And she was like, why? And I was like, look, pregnancy is complicated and difficult, and I don't think it's a good idea for us to be doing this in a lockdown, right? So let's at least wait until we find that life is returning to some kind of normalcy before we start trying. And she said, look, I don't think it's a big deal because, I mean, on average, it's going to take 6 months to a year before we get pregnant. And I was like, ah, oh, where are you getting this from? And she's like with all my friends, it's taken anywhere between 6 months, and in some cases, like worst case scenario, like 3 years and stuff for them to get pregnant. And I was like, look, I don't know about you. I come from a long line of accidents, okay? I was an accident. My dad was an accident. My mom was an accident. Their parents were accidents. So I don't anticipate like a lot of time going by between us trying and us succeeding, right? And she said, no, that's all nonsense, blah blah blah. But so anyway, um, the lockdowns kind of started to come to an end, kind of like September-ish, and so we're like, okay, so now life is returning to normal, so we'll start trying. So we go to a friend of mine who is Saitya's gynecologist, right? But she's been like Saitya's gynecologist for about 10 years, and a friend of mine for like 20. So we go to her and we're like, hey, so we want to have, so we're thinking like it's time for us to have a baby. So she's like, okay, um, which one of you has the problem? So we're like, none of us that we're aware of. And she says, well, then why are you here? So I was like, because you're my friend and you're like one of the best obstetricians in the city. I mean, in the country, really. So why wouldn't I be? And she's like, well, if nothing's wrong with either of you, just go and make a baby. And I was like, don't we need to do like tests and stuff? And she's like, no, man, just go and have a baby. So we're like, all right, cool. And then a month later, we go back to the hospital, and I'm like, I think we're pregnant. And she's like, oh, for God's sake, you were just here a couple of weeks ago. And I'm like, but I think we're pregnant. And she's like, why? And I'm like, because we did a home pregnancy test, you came back positive. She's like, okay, let's do a scan. So we do a scan, and she goes, you guys are having twins.
Wow.
And my response was, oh my God, we're having twins. And Sahitya's response was, are you sure? Are you sure you're not like looking at the same one from like two different angles or something? And our doctor's like, no, I've done this a few times. I'm not misreading this. And so we were like, all right, cool. Um, but then the thing is that apparently, with most women who conceive naturally, they don't even realize that they're pregnant for at least 3 or 4 months in some cases, right? So they tend to bypass this process that I'm going to tell you about, which is that sometimes you will be clinically pregnant with twins, but then one embryo won't make it, right?
Yeah.
So one egg just kind of like gets reabsorbed into the body, and then you have one baby. Now, most people, they don't catch their pregnancy that early, so they're completely unaware of it, right? So she said, look, you guys are clinically pregnant with twins, but I wouldn't say anything to anyone until there's a heartbeat, right?
Yeah.
So we were like, okay, how long before we can say something? So she said, you're going to have to wait at least a month, right? In a month, we should have a heartbeat, and then you can possibly tell family. So for the next month, we were avoiding our parents like crazy because honestly, you could have taken one look at us. I mean, especially if you gave birth to one of us, you could take one look at us and be like, wait, something's up. What's going on? Right?
Yeah.
So we
That's
were like,
parenting.
we just can't, like, so we were just coming up with the most ridiculous excuses. Like my mom would call and she'd be like, hey, do you guys want to come over for dinner? And I'd be like, yeah, no, we can't because, the thing. And so, yeah. And she's like, what thing? And I'm like, do you remember we were having that conversation and then like the other, yeah. So anyway, listen, I got to go. I'll talk to you later. I put the phone down. And I was like, because if I lie to her, she knows something's up because she will instantly know that I'm lying. I just have to be vague enough that she won't put two and two together and know that something's up, right? So anyway, so we waited for the month. We got the heartbeats. There were both heartbeats, and so our doctor was like, okay, so you can tell your parents that you're pregnant with twins, but I wouldn't go public just yet. So we're like, cool, we understand that. So we were also moving house at that point, right? So we invited both sets of parents over, and we were like, hey, listen, when we moved into this house, uh, the first night that we lived here, you guys came over for dinner. So we wanted our last dinner to also be with you guys. So come, right? Um, so they all come over for dinner, and the side story that I need to tell you is that about 3 months before we got pregnant, we also got a puppy, right? And when we when we talk to the puppy, we refer to Sahitya's parents and my parents as like grandma, grandpa types, right? So they're Luna's grandparents as well. So we bought these little mugs, right? And these so mugs for my parents, and you know the little like the coffee that you like in the south you drink in the little, it's called a davra tumbler, yeah. So we got two of those. We got two cups, and on my parents' cups we wrote uh, on my mother's cup it said Nana, established 2021, right? Sorry, 2022. No, 2021. And then it said, and then on my dad's it said Pop Up, established 2021. And on her parents it said Party for her mum and Tata for her dad, established 2021. And so we were like chatting and laughing and joking. We were like, hey, okay, so we've got like these little gifts for you guys. So we give them the gifts and they open it up. And my mom looks at it. She's like, oh, that's so sweet. Because she thought we were talking about the puppy,
Wow.
right? So she hadn't yet made the connection. Because this was still 2020, right? We were still in 2020 and it said established 2021. But she hadn't made that connection yet. And my dad looks at his cup and he's like, oh, that's very sweet. Oh, very nice. And Sahitya's mom pulls her cup out, looks at it, and she was sitting right next to my mom, right? So it was my dad, my mom, Sahitya's mom, and then Sahitya's dad was on the other sofa. And she looked at her husband and she said, does your cup say Tata? And he says, yes, it does. And she looked at us and she's like, am I going to be one? And we Yeah, and my mom went, "What? What? Wait, what? Oh my god! Oh my god!" And like that just went crazy. Then there was just like a whole lot of hugging and kissing and all of that, and a lot of laughing, and that was it because I like both our parents, well, both sets of parents, they knew that we were never going to get married because we've always been very clear with them that it's not something that we ever want to do. um, but so her parents were always hopeful that we'd decide to have children, and my parents were like, I don't think he's going to do it. He doesn't want to get married. He's probably not going to want children either. So they had kind of resigned themselves to this idea that they were never going to be grandparents, right? And then I mean they got like literally the thing that they thought was impossible. So and then twins, and we're like, yeah, oh, by the way, we're having twins. And it was like, and then like the second round of like screaming and like you're hugging and just insanity, right? And then so we waited until like we were about 4 months pregnant before we made it public. By that point it was pretty certain that there were no major complications with the babies and they were going to be fine. So yeah, so we did it. It was amazing.
Okay. Now I wish I could like say this is like a weird coincidence or something, but my wife kind of picked a very similar thing off Pinterest, and this was
Mhm.
when we had our son. And for some reason, the guy I went to get the cups printed put the
Mhm.
wrong year. So I was like, okay, I can't do this to my. So I did it for my dad, and I did it exactly same thing, right? For my in-laws. And so literally, like when the mistake that he did was he printed the wrong year for my
Mhm.
in-laws,
Oh
right?
wow!
So I
But
was
did he
like,
go? Did
okay,
he go like a year up or a year down or like
a year previous.
a year previous? Okay, so
Yeah.
it's like,
So I
hey,
was like,
grandparents, and you haven't known for a year.
so I was like, okay, what do we do with these cups? Luckily, we found like somebody who, relatives who were like
Yeah,
parents,
so
I
so
mean,
so we
grandparents
were
earlier. So
we,
we
we
gave
had
them
to
that.
do all of this like kind of in between lockdowns, right? So we actually like we bought the cups online and we hand painted them ourselves.
Okay, that's
So that
helpful.
was, yeah. So
That's
like
sweet.
I did for my parents and Saitya hand wrote the cups for hers because I was like, if you want me to write Tamil, good luck with anyone reading it because I'll just draw jalebis and murkus and stuff and I'd be like, oh, that's Tamil. There you go.
Now, since we've done a bit of research and I've actually read about this, I'm kind of gonna ask you about this experience, right?
Mhm.
Which is y'all have hyphenated surnames, and
Yeah.
it's coincidental or not, I don't know, we can decide it after I tell you this, is that just today
Hmm.
in Italy they
Hmm.
actually passed a rule which says it's actually unlawful to give automatically children their father's surname.
Hmm.
And what they've actually decided is that children should be given both parents' surnames in order that they decide, unless the children agree to take, that they'll agree to take just one of them.
Right.
And I was like, this is the world we live in, right? This is 2022. This is happening
Yeah.
in Italy.
Yeah.
We consume the same kind of cheese and, I don't know, football and whatnot, but just look at the difference in the laws, right?
But
So I'm very curious to know about what your experience was like with the hyphenated
okay, listen, for
surnames.
starters, since we're talking about Italy, right? The one thing that we have to remember, like the one thing that is remarkably similar to India yet completely different, is the fact that in Italy your mother is God. Yeah. And by extension, every woman is a step above. Yeah. So even though it's not a matriarchal society, it kind of in a way functions like that, right? In India, we have, the phrase "naam ka vaste," right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
just
of course.
yeah. So, my mother is God, my sister is God. Arey, wo ladki dekho, and it's like, so suddenly there's a disconnect. It's like if I'm related to someone, then they are God. All other women I can treat like garbage. Yeah. That's kind of like weirdly the culture that we come from, in the sense that we don't really have a wide arching respect for women, right? Which is truly problematic for our country. And I just think, I'm like, yeah, why should the mother of the children, that not even arguably, absolutely 100% certain did more to bring them into the world than I did, why does she not get to put a stamp on the name? Right? Why do I just automatically? I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, obviously they're going to be Edwards. That's it's what it is. I mean, like, think about, forget about fathers who are active parents, right? Think about all those deadbeat dads, yeah, who still get their name, whose kids still end up with their surname in spite of the fact that they were there for 60 seconds. That was the amount of time that they spent in this child's life creating the child, and then the child will still get their name. It's like, that's just mental, you know. I just find
It's further messed up when the kid actually looks like the dad.
true, true. Yeah. So no, but coming back to the question that you actually asked, which was about us hyphenating our kids' surnames. Um, so if you hyphenate our surnames, then it's Acharya hyphen Edwards, right? So our son is River and our daughter is Zara, and so it's River Acharya Edwards, Zara Acharya Edwards, and of course with the hyphen between the Acharya and the Edwards. Except when we went for the birth certificate, they gave it to us and it just said, River Acharya Edwards. So it looks like first name River, surname Edwards, middle name Acharya, and the same for Zara. And we were like, no, 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 no. Those have to be hyphenated. And they're like, this guy's like, hyphenate? So I'm like, dash, dash, right? It's like Acharya dash Edwards. And he's like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, why not? And he's like, because see, if I press dash, nothing happens. It doesn't recognize that. It doesn't recognize the keystroke, right? I'm like, what do you mean? But like you have the keys on your keyboard, and he's like, yeah, but it only like it doesn't recognize special characters. I'm like, but people hyphenate their surnames all the time, and he's like, yeah, no, but it doesn't work in India. And so I called a friend of mine, a classmate of mine, because his surname is Das Gupta, and so I called him and I was like, hey, listen, Sam, what does your passport say? And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, your name on your passport. Like, first name Samir, surname Das Gupta. I'm like, okay, does it have a hyphen? Because I think so. I was like, good enough. As long as it's on a separate line, I'm okay with that, right? Because otherwise, it's all on the same line, and you don't really have to care that much. But yeah, the one place where your surname and your first name are on different lines, at least you can do two names in one place. So we were like, okay, that's hopeful. And while at the same time, Elon Musk names his son, the
Yeah.
Ash 12 something something, and that's okay for a birth certificate. You can do numbers in America, right? You can do Greek letters in America, but you can't do dash in India. Like, come on. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Like that, when when people say that the world is equal, the world is small, we are all similar, and I'm like, no, 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 no. It's very different.
I think we're all similarly backward. Do you know what I mean?
That's an
Like you
interesting
look at
line.
any backward, you look at any backward idea, and it's global, right? And you look at any idea that's looking past day after tomorrow, and it's like some four places. You know? I just think that that's kind of who we are as people. Is that as the human race, we are, I think, just a little scared of new, and that's kind of what, like most of us, I think, are just not fans of new. It's like, hey, let's just find a status quo that we like, and let's keep it that way. Like, just no matter what, don't.
I want to dig into what you're saying, right? And I think that's kind of what we can, if we can use that same thing that you're saying, is what happens with parenting, right? Like a lot of things, and especially with dads, I feel,
Hmm.
because we're like, while it's nice for three of us to talk and say that, oh, we did this and we did that, but when I think about it, right, where as dads in general, as a whole community, scared of doing something new because your reference point is
True.
this,
Yeah.
and trying something new you don't know, right?
True.
Like it's so weird. Have you kind of experienced that, at least in the last
All the time.
year?
Because so one of the things that we were very, like, we were doing like hardcore research while Saidya was pregnant, because one of the things, like, so both of us are were very rational, or at least we try to be. That's the aim, right? So my aim in life is to have as many true beliefs and as few false beliefs as possible. And that's my goal, right? So so anything that you tell me, I will not take your word for it, not because I don't trust you, but because I'm like, no, I just want, so if you say, hey, I read this paper about the thing, I'd be like, send me the paper. I would like to read this scientific paper and then understand it in the way that you understand it, right? And I think that that's a fairly reasonable thing. So we were researching, everything from, parenting techniques to sleep training to nutrition to, thought processes and mindsets, and what made sense and what didn't make sense, and so we were looking at all of this information, and then once we had all the information, we would sift through it and we'd be like, what makes sense to us, right? Um, and so I'm very clear that everyone is allowed to have opinions, but we're not allowed to treat opinions like they're objective truth, right? And so like, for example, sleep training. Like, we looked at like tons of research on sleep training, and one of the things that became quite, well, at least it appeared to us that sleep training was really created so that parents could get better sleep. It had less to do with the child and more to do with the parents. And we were like, you know what, we're not going to sleep train our kids. And our friends were like, are you insane, dude? You're not going to sleep for like a year. And I'm like, okay, if that's what our children need, then that's what our children need. And if it's going to be uncomfortable and whatever, that's the price of parenting. That's the price of being a parent. I'm totally okay with that, right? So we never sleep trained our children, and as a result, they're almost a year old, and I don't think I've slept more than 4 hours a night since they were born. But that's how it is, because it's like, hey, if that's what they need, who the hell am I to be like, no, 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 that's just inconvenient. I just, like, Acha, you cry until you are so tired that you will just pass out and sleep all night, right? Yeah, no, I'm not okay with that. And so it was this sort of delicate balancing act of saying, okay, what is the research saying? What are we okay with regard to what the research is saying? And how far are we willing to go to make sure that they come first always, right? And that was the sort of conversations that we were having while we were pregnant. And so yeah, so whether it's nutrition, or the way that we introduce them to their own bodies, or like, no one will ever say shame, shame, puppy shame to my baby. If they do, I will throw them off a bloody balcony, right? Because I'm just very clear on that. I'm like, there is no shame. Yeah, what is this idea of shame to a child, right? This is not a concept that they should even be introduced to,
Exposed. Yeah.
especially not when they're like babies.
Yeah.
So so we wanted to make sure that they had, so like, for example, with their food, it was like, let's just give them as many different things as we can, as often as they can. Let's not have them repeat meals. So, like, Sahitya will sometimes, she'll be in the kitchen prepping for the next day, from like until like 12:30. She's like, she'll put one of the babies to bed. I've got the other baby. She'll run into the kitchen and she'll start prepping food for the next day. So we try to make sure that they have different kinds of fruit, and they have different kinds of vegetables, and they have the pasta, and they have like all of that stuff, just without the salt and the sugar. So that was the other thing. We're like, no salt until they're 1 year old, no sugar until they're two, um, because that's what the research suggests is it has the best outcome. And we're like, hey, let's trust the research, right? We're not going to do old wives' tales. We're not going to do. But in my day, it used to be like this. Nobody cares. In your day,
Yeah.
you didn't have Wi-Fi. You also didn't have color television, so I don't have to trust you when it comes to children, right? Like, that's just.
But Carrie, it's so interesting that the way you have summarized this entire process of parenting, right? And again, we're speaking to you as dads here. We've all had a journey, Peter, me, even you now. Is it something that probably changes or evolves, in this case, dad parenting, say after every 10 or 20 years? And do you see that, okay, are you happy with the fact that today you are a dad and you're clearly a very different dad, very involved dad, equal parenting and all of that, right? Do you see that this is also happening in the society today with other dads? Because clearly you've been exposed to a lot of people in 40 plus years of your life. What do you say about this whole new generation of parenting? Have you noticed something? Do you have an opinion on this?
Okay, I mean, first of all, I just need to be on record. I'm 29. Okay.
I'm gonna edit
Sorry,
that
I
out,
couldn't,
Nadir.
I could not resist that. I was, ever since you said in over 40 years, and I was like holding on to the joke. I'm like, finish your sentence, finish your sentence, finish your sentence.
I think we got a good promo line.
No, so no, it is nice to see that parents. I think, like, at least with the group of parents that we have as friends right now, you see all of them are quite a bit more involved in their child's lives than necessarily our parents were, or our grandparents for that matter. Um, but at the same time, I think that to a large degree that is really a bubble. It's like, for example, like, when we're having a conversation in English, right? We come from upwardly mobile families, right? And we forget all the time that we do not represent India, right? Like, the India that we represent is like we are like 2% of what's going on in India, right? And the remaining 98% is completely alien to us, right? And so, in that regard, I think that the small part of India that we occupy, that little bubble, I think it's gotten quite a bit better. But I think the rest of the country has a long way to go before, and when I say long way, I'm saying, you know maybe 100 years from now, you're gonna have everyone in the country just being like, yeah, that's what being a dad is, man. Like, what are you saying? Of course I change diapers. Of course I give them a bath. Of course you know, like, dude, I'm a father. Of course I would do those things. But I think that's at least 100 years away. Like, I mean, even now, like, so we obviously we have to have a nanny because it's not possible for both of us to work and do all of that stuff if we didn't have a lot of help. And so my parents pitch in, her parents pitch in. We also have a nanny. And like the other day, so the nanny, when she's only been with us for like 2 months, because we tried different nannies and it's like, yeah, this is not working. And we'd be like, okay, thank you very much. And then we get another one and we try her out for like a month and we'd be like, yeah, this is not working. One nanny we actually had for one day.
I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
so she showed up and I was like, yeah, just change a diaper. And I watched her change a diaper and I was like, yeah, yeah, you can head out. Thank you.
And-
We'll just pay you for the day and like you can go back home. We are
so
not,
you
yeah.
just reminded me, Cary, that Nadir and I, in like almost 3 years of doing the podcast, haven't done a nanny episode because I think
Really?
I can do a solo episode on just nannies.
Wait,
Considering
one second.
my
Let me get this straight. So you guys have done an episode on the Kevin Hart movie, Fatherhood, but you haven't done one about nannies?
See, when you put it
This-
that way, right?
Well, I mean, in fairness, Kevin Hart's movie did have more to do with fatherhood than a nanny does, because that's not a necessary part of fatherhood. But I think for most of us, it's an inevitable part of fatherhood. But yeah, no. So when our nanny was like fairly new, and Saitya was feeding one of them. I don't know which one it was, and so she called me and she said, I think the baby's pooped. Can you just check? So I picked the baby. It was my son. It was River. So I picked him up and I looked in his diaper and I was like, yeah, he has. I'll just change him and come back. And I put him on the changing mat and the nanny came running out. She's like, no, I'll do it. And I was like, I'm fine. I can handle it. And she's like, no, like I'll do it. And I was like, I know how to do this. This is not. And she stood there and she watched me do it, right? And she watched me like clean up his bum, right? Like, and she was just like, and then she actually told Sahitya, like later, like I had gone to work and she said, I watched Sir change the diaper and he did everything correctly. And Sahitya's like, he's been changing diapers from the day that they were born. Of course, he knows how to change a diaper and clean a baby's bottom, right? But like to her, it was unfathomable that this man, a man, but he's a man. Like, how did he learn how to do that? And it's like, it's not rocket science, and yeah, and also I don't think it should be optional, right? In fact, the other day, I came home from work really late, and I went in, and Zara was sleeping, and so I said hi to Sahitya, and Sahitya said, I think she's pooped, and maybe we need to change her diaper. And like Zara, she's wearing a onesie, right? So even to check, it's quite a long, drawn out process. So I just put my nose on her bum, and I went, I'm like, no, she hasn't pooped. And then Sahitya started laughing, and I was like, what? And she's like, look at us. Look at us. We're willing to stick our noses into another human being's bum to check if they've pooped, And I was like,
I think
yeah, like that's just it just seemed like the most natural thing to do.
And the easiest, like,
you know
it's like,
how
okay, done, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
no, not happening.
Yeah, and there's like a lot of times, like you see the movies, right? And like parents are changing the kids' diapers, and they're like gagging, and I haven't once gagged while changing a diaper. In fact, I will go on record to say my baby's poop doesn't stink. Right? Like just
Well-
like right
well,
now, I'm sure and here's the way I see it, right? If all of us had babies the same age, I'd be like, listen, Peter, Nadir, your baby's poop stinks, man. Like They're not like mine, right? And each of us will have exactly the same thing, right? Now that it'd be like, Peter, Cary, your baby's poop stinks, man, but like mine doesn't, right? But it's just, I mean, that's what it is. It's like that's your baby, and like nothing matters. And I'm like, sometimes I think that the way that parenthood is portrayed in films does not do parenthood justice, because it sets this weird standard that's actually not true, right? Like some things are actually way more difficult than they look in the movies, and some things are just way easier, right? And I'm
I'm
like, I
guessing that's I think that was the whole purpose of the movie in some ways, right?
no, like I so there's this movie called Bad Neighbors. Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
It's Seth Rogen and what's the good looking boy from the the boy who became like really popular because of that. It was like this musical show.
Zac Efron.
That's the one, right? So Zac Efron plays the bad neighbor, and then Seth Rogen plays the dad that lives next door with his wife. And I am failing to remember the actress. But yeah, there's a scene from there where they're changing a diaper and they're both like, "Bleh, bleh, bleh." And like I'm like, okay, I have never ever actually seen a parent in real life do that. And honestly, and to be completely honest, if I ever saw a father do that, I would judge him. I'd be like, dude, something's wrong with you. If you're smelling your baby's poo poo and you're like, "Bleh, bleh," I'm like, there is something wrong with you, because that just ain't normal, man. Everything that they make is beautiful. Shut up.
Okay, so I'm going to steer this conversation a little away from the poo poo and the diapers.
Fair enough.
And we're going to lighten things up a bit. And for this, of course, I have to transition by first giving credit to our common friend Anuj, because it's a question that he also kind of contributed, and I found it was like really good to ask you.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to quote it directly. So the question being, you've had a wild ride up until this point in life. What's the one thing about your past that you wouldn't want to let your kids know at all?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Like
Wow.
I can't think of a single thing that I wouldn't share with them. Um, like I honestly, there's nothing like that. That was also one of the things that Sahitya and I talked about like early on, because so both of us are atheists. That doesn't help matters, because again, India is not set up for, you know. Uh, so like every form that you have to fill out, they'll be like, religion. We'll be like, not applicable, and they'll be like, no. So I wrote NA, and they were like, what
Oh,
is NA? And they're like trying to figure it out. They're like, what NA? NA, the Muslim,
but
and I'm like, no, it's not applicable. And they're like, what do you mean it's not applicable? And I'm like, I don't have a religion. And they're like, everybody has a religion. I'm like, no, everybody doesn't. Some of us just don't. We don't do that. And they're like, so what God do you pray to? That was the next question. Okay, if you don't have religion, then what God do you pray to? And I'm like, I don't believe that God exists. And it's like, it's just like I just suddenly like flashed them or something, right? That's kind of the response that you get. and and so now her parents are Hindu and my parents are Christian, and both our parents are like very devout, right? And so my mom once asked me, she said, but why don't you want them to have a religion? I mean, you did when you were a child. And my point was, yeah, but I don't want to lie to them. I'm not going to tell them a story that I don't know is true. I'm not claiming that I know it's false, but I have no reason to think that it's true. And so I'm not going to tell them anything that I do not think is true. And similarly, so this kind of ties into the question that you're asking, which is, if they ask me, "Hey, Dad, we heard some stuff," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's probably true." Yeah, what was it? Was it like some sexy time stuff? And they'd be like, "Yeah, it was." And I'm like, "Yeah, that was all true. Yeah, your dad was a dog." I mean, when Sahitya made it public that we were dating, this is I'm talking. I mean, we've been together for 8 years. We've known each other for 9. But when she made it public that we were dating, like she likes to say, "Yeah, I got calls and messages from women from 3 different cities telling me what a big mistake it would be."
Wow.
And I'm like, they weren't wrong in that, they would have met me between the ages of 16 and 24, which is about when I was the biggest dog that I could possibly have been. And so, yeah, they were right if that was the guy that you were still dating. Except, you're not dating the 24-year-old me, you're dating the, at that point, like 35 or 36-year-old me, which is a very different me. So I don't blame them for warning you. I mean, hell, I might have warned you if I was still 24. I'd be like, this is not a good idea, right? Like, I am probably just gonna like ghost you or something.
Yeah, that's
But
what the terms are now, right? Like, there
yeah,
weren't
yeah,
those terms.
it's
Okay.
so yeah, so like, so we do things that, like, for the kids, like we do stuff that's culturally significant, but we don't do anything that has a religious, you know yeah, that's kind of how we are. And so, like, I don't want to do the whole Santa Claus thing. I'm just like, I get that, like, it's a tradition, but I also didn't like the fact that when I found out that it wasn't true, I didn't like the fact that my parents had lied to me for, you know 32
So
years at that point.
because I have a story on that, is that this past year,
Hmm.
in December, at my son's school, I was Santa Claus, right? And
Hey.
now here's the thing: I didn't want to tell my son about it, and I didn't want to kind of, he's 4 at that time. I don't
Right.
want to ruin it for him. And so here's me being all, and I think this is also reflective of just like how us as parents want to be so guarded and careful, and
Hmm.
we overthink sometimes these
Yeah.
very trivial things in the larger perspective. So I told my wife, like, listen, when I'm dressing up in the Santa outfit, just like let him be somewhere else so he doesn't kind of think, because he still has that. But here's my son who surprises me. He saw me dressed up as Santa Claus,
Hmm.
still came up to me, and the entire thing he realized, and I think in his head he had figured out that, hey, for today my dad is going to be Santa Claus for all my friends and stuff like that. Through the entire 3-hour program that I was sitting as Santa Claus, not
Hmm.
once did he come up and say dada or anything, but he
That is
saw me in that.
fantastic, though. Yeah.
And that blows my mind even now when I'm saying it, when I think
Yeah.
about it, because that's a 4-year-old, right?
Right.
Here
Right.
we adults claiming to know so much kind of put together this thing as, we must
Yeah, I'd
protect
walk in
him,
and be
we
like,
must.
"Hey, Peter, what's up?" I mean, Santa. Yeah,
But that's the
yeah,
thing, right? So like we've already built our kind of idea of how the kids should think, but
yeah,
maybe sometimes you just need to let the kids do what they need to do, man.
yeah.
Like, you know I want to wrap up, but there is like at least a couple of things I definitely have to ask you before we wrap up,
Uh
right?
huh.
One thing is, this is like I said in the start, right? We're doing Father's Month, and this is
Yeah.
one question we're gonna ask all dads. So one of the things, like, of all the dads that we've got this month, right, is that it's not just about showing up, right? It's about being involved in there. But a lot of that comes with, the looks that you talked about, and just
Yeah. Yeah.
people wondering, like, what's this guy doing there? So
Yeah.
here's your platform, and here's your chance, is what's one thing you'd like to say to those who see you and wonder, like, what's that guy doing here? Why is this dad, like, doing something for his kids?
All right. I'm going to start off by saying, like, I understand that fathers like me all over the country, especially in our country, and, well, largely for most of Asia. I think it's quite an Asian thing. um, I understand that people are going to look at us like we're insane, And for all intents and purposes, for the next 15 or 20 years, that's exactly what it's going to feel like. It's going to feel like we are insane. And then 15 or 20 years from now, people are going to go, oh, yeah, yeah, that's normal. That's I mean that's really that's kind of what's going to happen. And I think that for every father that gets a weird look, just just remember that, you know um, 20 years from now you're not going to be a freak. 20 years from now there are going to be people that will follow the path that you laid out, um, especially for the ones that are really public about their journey. I mean, you guys, for example, right? Like, you guys are super involved fathers, and you have a podcast, and and every person that listens to that podcast is going, "Hey, yeah, I can." Either I it's like, "Hey, I already do that," or, "Hey, I could just do that," right? And so in so many ways, there's fathers who are looking at you guys every week and saying, yeah, okay, so these guys have kind of shown me an idea, and like, maybe I can do that. Maybe it's not impossible, right? This is stuff that can happen. And I just think that as long as we're willing to put up with the weird looks and the seemingly insane sort of position that we're put in, as long as we continue to do that, I think uh, the faster we will see change, right? And that, to me, is huge, because it'll just mean that not only will we get to a place where we value our partners more, but we'll get to a place, I think, like, socially speaking, I think we'll get to a place where, like, I would truly like to believe that, like, my kids will grow up with a very different understanding of men and women than we had, right? Like, I mean, my mother to this day will be like, "That's a woman's job," and I'm like, "What? Did you just say cleaning dishes is a woman's job? Like, it's a job, but the job is not gendered. And
Yeah.
I'd like to believe that, my children will grow up in a world where they won't have to point that out to their parents, but more so, they'll grow up in a world where that's not even something that they would think about. It
Yeah.
would never even occur to them that, oh, that's a man's job, that's a woman's job. It would just be like, that's a job. Just whoever wants to do the job, right? Someone's got to do the job, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, yeah, I mean, if for example, if my son wanted to be a ballet dancer and my daughter wanted to be an automobile mechanic, what do I care? I'm like, if that's what you want to do it, right? And then I'll send you to ballet school, and I'll send you to engineering college, and the only difference is that, my darling, I'm not a great dancer, so I will not be able to help you there. But, my darling, I'm really good with engines, so I can help you there. That I, So, but, like, yeah, I just think that, society at large is due for a change, and the way that we see gender has a lot to do with that change. And so I just think that our kids' generations are just, I mean, I'm like a decade older than you guys, and your kids are older than mine. So they'll all more or less, like, grow up at the same time. And I'd like to believe that that world is going to be a world where, these sort of weird stereotypes don't happen anymore. And I think the only way that that doesn't happen is if we stick to our guns, and we don't let people's, like, weird expressions make us give in, right? It's like, if you're changing a diaper, bloody change a diaper. Don't, like, start changing the diaper and then someone gives you a weird look and you're like, yeah, okay, sweetie, you change this diaper. Right? Like, don't do that. Don't give in.
Yeah.
Just keep going. Do the things that you feel, like, be authentic, right? Like, don't change a diaper so that you can go and be like, oh, how many diapers I changed. Like, change the diaper because the diaper needs to be changed, right?
Yeah.
Not because you're the only person who can do it, but because you're the person that wants to do it, right? And just find that level of authenticity in the way that you raise your children, and I think that, that they'll be great. That's yeah.
Words of great wisdom from a dad to other dads, and I hope they're all listening.
Yeah, and a very new dad at that. Yeah, so maybe take all of the stuff that I say with a pinch of salt because maybe I just don't know what the hell I'm talking
No,
about.
maybe not, because you're speaking from the heart, and I think that is exactly what today's dads need to listen to. And thanks so much, man, Cary. We had so much fun today.
Thank you for having me.
I mean,
Thank
you opened your
you.
heart and your mind to us, so we really appreciate it, and we sincerely hope the listeners, appreciate this too. So thank you so much.
Hey, and I really hope that that your podcast grows in leaps and bounds and leaps and bounds and because it's something that is much needed. I think dads really don't have. I mean, there's like 1,000 WhatsApp groups for moms, and like the dads don't really have anything because I mean, what would we really talk about? Like as fathers,
I changed the diaper today, guys.
it's like
Shut up!
I mean,
We all do that.
yeah. Then you've got like one guy who's like, "Ah, what's a diaper?" अच्छा वो nappy बोलता है वो. But no, but like I mean I don't mean to like be evil to fathers who don't do it. It's not a contest, right? Like we're not in this to be like, oh, look at me, I should get Father of the Year. You know, in fact, just earlier today, Sahitya won an award, and so we were at the award function, and we had another young couple who were friends of ours, and so when his wife won her award, she went up and he was like taking a video of the whole thing, and so Sahitya said to him, she was like, hey, husband of the year, and he looked at me and he's like, bro, like how could I be husband of the year, right? And I look at him, I'm like, I'm totally cool with you being husband of the year. We're not married. So like you're the only one, like between the two of us, you're the only one that could be husband of the year, man. Take it. Like have fun, right? But yeah, I just like I just think that you guys are doing an amazing job. And I really do hope that that fathers just find their voice, by which I don't actually mean like speaking. I just mean like existing as fathers. I hope that every father just finds a way that makes sense to them, and that they're just more active in their children's lives, and I think the world will be a better place for it. So yeah,
Okay. On that note, it's a wrap. Thank you so much, Cary.
thank
We
you,
really appreciate this conversation.
thank you,
Thanks, Cary. Thank you so much.
thanks, Nadir.
Wow, Nadir, honestly, Cary has so much to talk about and on so many different topics. I think really, if Cary has not already done so, he should have done radio. And I know he has a podcast, but I think this is incentive enough for him to continue podcasting.
I think he does both, or he's done both in the past. He's quite a big personality. Somewhere in his intro, we must have probably missed out, but I'm pretty sure he was a radio host at some point. He also has his own podcast. And what I love about Cary's personality is that he's very direct, like zero bananas given. He calls a spade a spade. And I think that's why we love talking to these kind of people, because they're so clear in their mind about the way they want to live their lives. And that's just fantastic.
Honestly, Cary is a delight to have as a guest on a podcast because you can just talk so much to him. And I think easily we could have had this conversation for 2 or 3 more hours and we could have talked about like way more topics. Don't you agree, Nadir?
For sure, Carrie is such a colorful character, and he has dabbled in so many things, right? So I have so much confidence that doing whatever a dad does is going to come so naturally and so nicely to him. Whatever he does, whatever stories that he has, I'm sure he'll be able to take those forward the way he has been doing it. And he's just a great guy, and I'm so glad that we found him and he was able to tell us his story with all shades of colors.
Yeah, and I think it's a great way to kick off this Father's Month. We've got few more stories left this month. As always, just stay tuned to our social media handles or our website popsinapod.in, and stay tuned to what we have coming up next in this Father's Month.
Our second dad of Father's Month has actually been in the public eye, and there's a very high chance you've probably seen him on the Indian edition of Shark Tank. So, trust me, he's got a great story to tell, and you don't want to miss that. See you guys next week.